April 29, 1945, Dachau, Germany. American soldiers walked through the gates of the concentration camp. What they found stopped them cold. Piles of bodies. Thousands of skeletal prisoners barely alive. Gas chambers still warm from use. The smell of death everywhere. And in the corner, 50 SS guards, hands raised, surrendering. The American soldiers looked at the guards, then looked at the bodies, then looked back at the guards. What happened next would become one of the most controversial moments of the entire war. Within hours, all 50 SS guards were dead. Shot. Executed. Not in combat. Not in self-defense. Executed. After they surrendered. It was a war crime. Clear and undeniable. When news reached headquarters, senior officers demanded justice. Court-martial the soldiers. Prosecute them. Make an example. The case landed on General Patton's desk. He had to choose. Punish American soldiers for killing the men who ran a death camp, or protect them and cover up a war crime. This is the story of what Patton said when asked to destroy his own men for doing what he himself might have done. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that force us to confront the hardest questions about war, justice, and humanity. To understand what happened at Dachau, you need to understand what the American soldiers walked into that day. The 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, had been fighting across Europe for 2 years. They'd seen combat in Sicily, Italy, France, and now Germany. They were hardened veterans, men who had seen the worst of war, but nothing prepared them for Dachau. The camp had been operating since 1933, 12 years of torture, starvation, medical experiments, and mass murder. Over 40,000 people had died there. When the Americans arrived, 30,000 prisoners were still alive. Barely. The first soldiers through the gate stopped. Some vomited. Others started crying. A few just stood there, unable to process what they were seeing. There were rail cars, 39 of them, filled with bodies. Thousands of corpses stacked like cargo. They'd been left there to rot. The smell was overwhelming. Inside the camp, the living looked like the dead. Skeletal figures in striped uniforms. Eyes sunken, skin stretched over bone. Moving slowly. Some couldn't even stand. The soldiers saw the gas chambers, the crematoriums, the medical experimentation rooms, the punishment cells where prisoners were left to starve. And everywhere, evidence of systematic, organized industrial murder. One soldier, Private John Lee, later described it. "We thought we knew what evil looked like. We'd been fighting it for 2 years. But this was something else. This was hell on earth." The SS guards knew the Americans were coming. Most had fled, but about 50 remained. Some were too confident, others had nowhere to go. A few genuinely believed they'd done nothing wrong. When the Americans entered the camp, these guards threw down their weapons and raised their hands. They surrendered. According to the Geneva Convention, they were now prisoners of war, entitled to protection. But the American soldiers weren't thinking about the Geneva Convention. They were thinking about the bodies in the rail cars, the skeletal prisoners, the children's clothing sorted in warehouses, the ovens still containing human remains. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't ordered. It was spontaneous rage. A soldier raised his rifle, shot an SS guard in the head, then another soldier did the same, then another. Some guards tried to run. They were shot in the back. Others begged for mercy. They were shot anyway. A few were beaten to death with rifle butts. Within 20 minutes, approximately 50 SS guards were dead. Some accounts say it was more. The exact number is disputed. But what's certain is this: American soldiers executed surrendered prisoners. It was murder, a war crime, clear violation of international law, and some of the American soldiers didn't regret it. Privately again, "I know what we did was wrong. Legally, technically. But when you see what they did, when you smell the ovens, when you look into the eyes of those prisoners, I can't say I wouldn't do it again." But not all the Americans participated. Some officers tried to stop it. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, commanding officer of one of the battalions, physically intervened. He put himself between his soldiers and the remaining SS guards. He later described grabbing a soldier's rifle, screaming at his men to stop, threatening to shoot anyone who fired another round. The killing stopped, but the damage was done. Within hours, the story reached division headquarters, then Corps headquarters, then Army headquarters, and finally General George S. Patton. Patton was already at Dachau. He'd arrived the day after liberation to see the camp himself. He walked through the same gates his soldiers had walked through, saw the same rail cars, the same bodies, the same skeletal prisoners. His reaction was visceral. He walked out of one barrack and vomited. This was a man who'd seen 2 world wars, who'd commanded men in some of the bloodiest battles in history. And he vomited. He ordered German civilians from the nearby town to be brought to the camp, forced them to see it, made them bury bodies. He wanted them to understand what had been done in their name. But then came the report about his soldiers, about the executions, about the war crime. Patton read the preliminary investigation. Witness statements, physical evidence. It was clear what had happened. And almost immediately, pressure started building. The Inspector General's office wanted a full investigation. They wanted charges, court-martials, prison sentences. The Judge Advocate General's office agreed. This was murder. American soldiers had murdered prisoners of war. There had to be consequences. Even Eisenhower weighed in. The Supreme Commander sent a message. This cannot be covered up. We cannot become what we're fighting against. The case landed on Patton's desk with a clear expectation. Prosecute, punish, make it right. Patton sat in his office, the investigation report in front of him. Photos from Dachau spread across his desk. He had a choice to make. On one side, the law, the rules of war, the Geneva Convention, everything that separated civilized nations from barbarians. If he didn't prosecute, he was condoning murder, setting a precedent that war crimes were acceptable if the victims were evil enough. On the other side, his soldiers, men who'd fought for 3 years, who'd seen their friends die, who'd walked into hell and responded with human rage. If he prosecuted them, he'd be destroying the lives of men who'd done what any human might do in that situation. What would you do? Patton made his decision quickly. He called in his staff, told them to prepare a response to the Inspector General. The response was classic Patton. Blunt, unapologetic, and carefully worded to protect his men while acknowledging reality. He wrote, "I have investigated the allegations. The evidence is inconclusive. In the chaos of Camp Liberation, with thousands of prisoners, scattered SS guards, and incoming fire from remaining German positions, it is impossible to determine with certainty which deaths resulted from combat and which did not." It was technically true. The Camp Liberation had been chaotic. There had been some resistance. Some Germans had fired on Americans. But it was also deliberately misleading. Patton knew exactly what had happened. He'd read the witness statements. He knew his soldiers had executed surrendered prisoners. He continued, "Furthermore, even if executions occurred, I find the emotional and psychological state of soldiers who had just witnessed the horrors of Dachau to be a significant mitigating factor. These men saw evidence of crimes so enormous that temporary insanity is not an unreasonable conclusion." Temporary insanity. A legal defense. Patton was protecting his men. But he went further. "I will not court-martial soldiers for killing SS guards at a death camp. If that makes me complicit in a war crime, so be it. But I will not destroy American soldiers for doing what I myself might have done in their place." That last sentence was the key. What I myself might have done. Patton was admitting that in the same situation, seeing the same horrors, he might have pulled the trigger too. He was putting himself in the same moral category as his soldiers. The response went up the chain of command, and it created a problem. The Inspector General's office was furious. This was obstruction, a cover-up. Patton was protecting war criminals. The Judge Advocate General prepared a memo arguing for Patton's removal. If he wouldn't prosecute, someone else should. But then something interesting happened. The memo never went anywhere. Why? Because at the highest levels of command, people started asking uncomfortable questions. What would a trial look like? American soldiers on the stand describing what they saw at Dachau. Defense attorneys putting Holocaust survivors on the witness stand. Photos of gas chambers and mass graves shown to a jury. The verdict was almost irrelevant. The trial itself would put the entire American military justice system in an impossible position. If the soldiers were convicted, it would look like America cared more about the lives of SS guards than the victims of the Holocaust. If they were acquitted, it would establish a precedent that war crimes were acceptable under certain emotional circumstances. Either way, it was a nightmare. So the investigation quietly died, buried in paperwork, classified, marked inconclusive. The soldiers who pulled the triggers were never charged, never prosecuted, never punished. Patton's protection had worked. Years later, historians would debate whether this was justice or a cover-up. Some argue Patton was right, that prosecuting soldiers for human rage in the face of industrial murder would have been unjust. that the SS guards at Dachau had forfeited any claim to legal protection by their participation in genocide. Others argue Patton was wrong, that the rule of law matters precisely when it's hardest to follow, that if we excuse war crimes when the victims are evil, we've lost the moral authority to prosecute war crimes at all. Both sides have a point. What's certain is that Patton chose his soldiers over the law. He chose protecting men he'd commanded over abstract principles of justice. He believed, genuinely, that what his soldiers did was wrong, but he also believed that punishing them would be worse. In his private diary he wrote, "I cannot condemn men for doing in passion what the world should have done in policy years ago. If killing SS guards is a crime, then we are all criminals for not stopping the camp sooner." That might be the most honest assessment of the entire incident. The Dachau executions remain one of the most controversial moments of World War II, not because anyone defends the SS guards, but because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. War creates situations where all choices are bad, where law and justice don't align, where doing the right thing and doing the legal thing are not the same. Patton understood that, and he made his choice. The soldiers who executed those SS guards went home. They lived their lives, some felt guilt, others didn't, but none faced a court-martial, because Patton believed that some crimes committed in the face of unimaginable evil deserved understanding more than punishment. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have prosecuted your own soldiers? Or would you have protected them? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more World War II stories that don't have easy answers, make sure to subscribe.